What's up? This is Periphery tier list. Hang on just a sec. Now we're good. I've been a fan of Periphery's music for less than a decade, and they're already becoming my favorite band of all time. It used to be Alter Bridge, and then I watched the prayer position bass playthrough in college and went, sign me the fuck up!
Crunchy Jip peanut butter ass bass tone? How is Vsauce so good at guitar?
They've released 7 albums and 2 EPs over the last 14 years, so I thought now would be a fun time for a tier list. 2 things, this video might just be me glazing on their discography for 15 minutes, so just be prepared for that.
Don't worry, it only ended up being 11 minutes. You're good, dude.
And a big reason why I hold them in such high regard is that I don't think I can really call any record of theirs bad, so if I rank any of these albums low, it's not because I dislike it, it's just that there's something else they've released since then that I happen to like a bit more. Oh fuck, the glazing's already started. Perfect example of this, I put Periphery 1 into C tier. I don't think it's outrageous to say that a band's first album is no longer their greatest work when they've released so much more music over several years after and have advanced sonically and creatively in such leaps and bounds that eventually their original works just kind of get left in the dust. If you compare any other album Periphery's released since 2012 to P1, it's kind of like Hydrogen Bomb versus Coughing Baby in my opinion. It just can't compete. The upside is Misha getting to convert a lot of these SoundClick demos into actual tracks. Icarus Lives is still an absolute classic. The intro riffs to Let Her Experiment, Buttersnips, and Ziegler Rocks all still stir something up in my soul, and All New Materials might be the song on this album that holds up the best after 14 years. But the downside is really only Misha had instrumental input, and this thing didn't really seem like it was meant for vocals, and you can tell from Spencer's performance. It's a very singular identity stretched out for 80 minutes. It's vintage Djent, if we can call Djent vintage yet, but compared to everything else in Periphery's output, there's plenty more albums now that outshine P1 all these years later. Except the Icarus EP, that's D tier. Look, it's the P1 B-side EP with a couple remixes. It's nothing insane. It's nice that these songs got actual commercial releases as opposed to just getting tacked on as iTunes bonus tracks, but it's down here for the same reasons P1 is also down low on this list, and it also just doesn't really flow as well. The real question is Periphery 2 still in S tier? I have it in A, actually, which isn't really a knock on it because I still think it's amazing. This time it's personal is where the Periphery album formula really starts to take shape. Recurring theme or motif, old demos getting modernized and completed, and at least one rock or electronic song or just a song that isn't very djenty or proggy. All 3 of these things have been present on every Periphery album release since 2012. The Somewhere in Time trilogy of Muramasa, Ragnarok, and Masamune feels like glue for the full P2 experience. You hear it the first time, you're like, oh, that's kind of a cool opening line. Then you hear it again midway through and you sit up and you're like, wait, I heard this already, but now it's different. And then you hear it again at the very end, like it's the conclusion to a whole saga. It's great. It also makes use of everyone's collective talents. There's tons of Misha demos in here still, but now Jake has creative input, Mark and Nolly are in the band, so everyone's creative DNA starts weaving together, and now Spencer's writing his own melodies and lyrics and sounds 10 times better than he did on P1. What comes out is an album that's very diverse, complex, and articulate, and holds up very well 12 years after release. This is where peak Periphery was being born. Personally, I don't think it is their peak, and as somebody who got into them in 2017, I could absolutely understand why people in 2012 thought it was, but it's absolutely stood the test of time, and honestly, really hasn't flinched. Easy A tier for me. Clear? God, what do we do with you? Come and stare at her. I think I enjoy it about as much as Icarus, to be honest. I'm thinking D tier. The concept of every band member getting their own song to write and direct from the ground up is interesting, and in the name of experimentation, it's honestly a cool project. It's just a weird listen. The production and the genre influence changes from song to song make this a really curious listen front to back. It's cool to see how everyone's individual sound gets distilled into a single track with the rest of the band helping to bring it to life, but it's not like it tells a super cohesive story or anything. It did give us Pale Aura though. Underrated as fuck song, but as a whole, Clear is just very much kind of there in contrast to everything else the band's put out. Next up, though,
Juggernaut!
Don't let the split between Alpha and Omega fool you. Juggernaut is a 17-track, 80-minute-long journey that should be experienced as such for full effect. And what a fucking effect it is. Juggernaut is S tier for me. The production is my favorite on any Periphery record. The main story is grim and dark, but also their most enticing. The variety of songwriting seems like it flexes everyone's individual capabilities in the best way, and the main Juggernaut theme and the numerous other small melodies that get re-referenced over and over throughout makes this one of the coolest audio odysseys I've ever heard in my life. It's not just that it's a concept album with the darkest lyrical content of any Periphery release, or that everything was surgically engineered for maximum groove. It's the sprinkling of these small motifs, teasers to upcoming songs, and references to previous ones that help the emotional, musical story of this album hit in a way like nothing else I've ever heard. Like, when you can make jazz elevator music on a prog Djent album sound that fresh, you've truly hit a level of musicianship that I could just never comprehend. I love Heavy Heart, Alpha, Rainbow Gravity, Psychosphere, The Bad Thing, Graveless, Stranger Things, just to name a few. There's not a bad song in this whole experience, which is even more impressive considering the time of tumult the band found themselves in while developing it. They went through creative and communicative hell getting it done, in the same way that the protagonist of the story they wrote also went through hell a few times. I just hope they can still appreciate what they made as much as I do, because, in my opinion, Juggernaut is a masterpiece, and I think it's their best work to date. But just behind that is Periphery 3. This was my entry point to Periphery, the record that introduced me to their sound, and it does hold a special place in my heart as a result of that, but I still think it deserves A tier regardless. Select Difficulty features my favorite drum production and my favorite drum performance from Matt. Like, so much of this album gets held together by how good he is on the sticks here. And I also think it's their most fun sounding album. It's not deliberately clinical like Juggernaut, but more loose, lighter energy, brighter mix. And it makes sense because this is where the band started producing everything over apartment sleepovers with good vibes and video games. It's literally called Select Difficulty. It's just the album where everyone understands their individual and collective capabilities already, but together with a different communication flow, they're writing whatever they feel like without feeling like they have to retread everything. It does still follow their formula, but not because they really have anything to prove other than to themselves, and it really shows. Marigold, The Way the News Goes, Absalom, and Prayer Position are all no skips from me, and I adore the small references to Loon, eventually building up to the finale of the album and delivering this insane emotional gut punch. It's top 2 Periphery songs for me. I think it's on par with P2 in my head. It's very different approaches to the Periphery sound, but they're equally as creative and emotive to my ears. Now, the circumstance that arises in my head with Jug, P2, and P3 being so well crafted is that it would take something otherworldly extraordinary to top how good those records are. Neither P4 or P5 hit me on the same level, but I'm still very much a fan of both of them. And I'm talking about them in tandem here because I think they're both cut from very similar cloth. Same bass writing and production process as P3, no label expectations or timeframes to meet so they can flex their creative muscles in a different way, 9-track, hour-long experiences with a bunch of instant classics littered throughout, and more experimentation that pushes the definition of the band even further than just being a godfather of Djent. The best way I can describe it is that both albums feel less like stories and more like collections of songs. The formula does get a little bit broken here because both albums only have one reference back to themselves that I can spot, whereas everything up to this point had like 2 or 3. Hailstand has Reptile and Satellites on the same album, which feel like self-contained stories in and of themselves that make them tough acts for the rest of the songs on that album to follow. And Djent is not a genre, to me, has always felt like it's missing a song. I wouldn't change up the track flow, but it feels like Silhouette and Dying Star come up in the track listing a little bit early, so one more song between Everything Is Fine and Silhouette, and that track flow is as smooth as a baby's ass. But I've also found that I approach these records with more of a perfectionist eye because of everything that came before it. So if I just remind myself that no art is ever perfect, then both of these albums are still awesome. P5 has this great blend of brutal chunk and atmospheric emotion-driving set pieces, and P4 has a fucking 16-minute long song on it that doesn't suck, it fucks. And neither record is taking themselves too seriously. Like, P5 was meant to be a Juggernaut sequel before that idea got scrapped, but everyone is better for it, both in the music they created and the band themselves, given how they talked about how hard it was to put that album together. And that's probably the other big reason I enjoy Periphery so much. Like, they play a style of music I adore and are technically savvy and creative as hell, but they also don't take themselves too seriously. When they do, they can make stuff like Juggernaut, but the places that their minds wander to when they're just making music for themselves and having fun with it is some of my favorite music I've ever heard. I warned you this was a dick-sucking video. I don't know what you expected. Thanks a lot, guys. However long that next album takes, I'll be here waiting for it. Now bring Nolly back or I will annex England and do it for you!